Chapter 4, Lecture 5. Now we turn to development of the brain. So let's look briefly at the different parts of the brain. You may recall that in the beginning slide I had told you that you don't need to go into very much detail about this. So your best guide is going to be figure 4-11 that gives you a basic outline of where the different regions of the brain are located. So I'd like to draw your attention to this structure, this yellow thing that's called the brainstem, this tube-looking thing, and it goes down and forms the spinal cord. And the brainstem consists of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. The next area of the brain is the cerebellum. The brainstem is the oldest structure of the brain and covers the most basic functions like breathing and so on. The cerebellum is the next structure of the brain and again is the most, it's the second oldest, and it also covers more basic functions. It controls sensory and motor activity. Okay, so these two are very basic structures of the brain. What makes us human is this big cerebrum right on top, all around, which it really houses all our higher order thinking, our thoughts, memory, language, emotions, conscious motor control, and so on. Okay, and it's important for us to understand the frontal lobe because that is very important in our cognitive performance. Now what we need to know about brain cells is that brain cells are called neurons. Neurons are the basic brain cells. They're like a bundle of wires in your brain. Your brain is basically an electrical system. It's like a bundle of wires. Neurons send and receive information. They're the long strands. Axons and dendrites are like the narrow branches, and if you hold up your two hands in front of you with your fingers spread and not touching, you'll see that that's what the axons and dendrites look like at the end of the neurons. They don't touch each other. They're like these fingery branches that are close to each other but don't touch each other. The glia are structures that nourish and protect the neurons. Now you see these gaps between the ends of the neurons? These gaps are synapses, and the chemical messengers that bridge the gaps and communicate signals through the different parts of the brain, those chemical messengers are called neurotransmitters. So understanding neurons, axons and dendrites and neurotransmitters are really important to understanding how a healthy brain functions. Signals, electrical signals go through the nerves. They reach the ends of the neurons, they reach the axons and the dendrites. And then to communicate from one bundle of nerves to another, they depend on neurotransmitters, these chemical messengers. And many mental illnesses, whether it's ADHD or depression or schizophrenia or what, are because of the malfunction of neurotransmitters. Another important concept is myelination. Myelin is the fatty insulation that sheathes the nerve cells. It's just like the insulation around a wire. And the insulation makes the communication among brain cells efficient. This helps to send faster signals. The signals are not just getting crossed, the wires are not getting crossed and signals going here and there. So the myelination is extremely important. And myelination is a process that continues in infancy, starts in infancy and continues through young adulthood. There are two processes in neuronal growth which are important to know. Integration is the neurons that control specific groups of muscles start coordinating their activities. That is the core of integration. The other is differentiation. Each neuron or bundle of neurons then takes on a specialized function. So first the neurons coordinate and get organized as to they're going to cooperate and control a special set of muscles, and then they differentiate that each bundle takes on a specialized function. Cell death is an important aspect of the growth of the brain. The brain is born with billions of more neurons and connections that are needed. And it's too much. There's just too much that is needed, and it can be inefficient. So the brain prunes or cuts away those cells and pathways that are no longer needed. The process begins prenatally and it continues after birth to create an efficient nervous system. And what gets retained and what gets pruned depends on the environment. If the baby is in an environment where certain abilities are important, those neurons are retained. Other neurons get pruned. The lesson this holds for all of us is that the abilities that you want to retain use them, immerse yourself in them, and work hard at them, and you will strengthen those parts of your brain. And if you spend a lot of time on activities that are not helpful to you, like watching too much TV or surfing the internet for entertainment rather than actually actively seeking and organizing information, you're strengthening those neurons and you're pruning away the neurons that are going to be more helpful in your more useful and productive activities. So this is again leads us to a very important concept. The brain is molded by development and the environment. This is called brain plasticity. Remember, we talked about this, and brain plasticity is the capacity of the brain to respond to the environment. So this implies various things. If the child is in a non-enriched environment, the brain will not grow to full capacity. On the other hand, if the child can be remediated, if they have certain conditions or illnesses or injuries, you can really remediate and give them very enriched therapy and environment. The brain will respond and grow new connections and develop to overcome those challenges to a large extent. The brain has the greatest amount of plasticity in the first 3 years of life. This is the basis for all the early intervention programs from birth through age 3 that are provided in all states of the country for children who have been diagnosed and identified with various birth challenges, whether it's cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, autism, any diagnosis that you have. Early intervention is key. The earlier you intervene, the better you can remediate. The threats to brain development include sensory impoverishment and malnutrition. So a child who grows up in a deprived environment, in a poverty-stricken area, or in a situation where there's a lot of prolonged toxic stress due to abuse or unsafe environment, this can really distort the development of the brain. Corrective experiences can relieve past deprivations to a fair extent depending on the underlying resilience and temperament of the child, and how early you catch them, how severe the past experiences were, and how much correction you're able to give them. So all of you who are planning to go into careers relating to early childhood development, this is the basis for those careers, that all of the interventions and programs and experiences that you will develop and offer to your clients are taking advantage of the idea of brain plasticity and the fact that you can remediate past deprivations. Now we turn to the early senses of the child. The early senses include touch and pain. Touch is the first sense to develop, and touch and pain are developed in the womb before the time of birth. So children are able to experience pain in the womb just before birth and at birth. Earlier, up through the early 60s, surgeons would perform surgery on newborns without anesthesia because they said the babies who need the surgery are very sick and the anesthesia can carry the risk of death because they'll stop breathing. And they said, well, children's nervous systems are not developed enough to feel pain anyway, so just because they're screaming, well, babies scream, so let's just get the surgery done. Nowadays, thankfully, we know better. We know that children are able to experience great pain and suffering at the time of birth. It is not appropriate to conduct medical procedures on them without pain relief, and that terrible stress of undergoing a surgery or procedures without anesthesia can create lifelong physical, psychosocial, and cognitive complications. And they can measure this by looking at stress hormones in the body. Smell and taste also develop in the womb. Newborns prefer sweeter tastes because breast milk is slightly on the sweeter side, because sugar is a good source of energy. Preferences of newborns are also dictated by what the mother has eaten. So women who eat foods like vegetables and so on, their children develop a taste for those foods. So this is again a good reason to encourage healthy eating in mothers. Fluids and odors are transmitted through the amniotic fluid to the child, and that's how they figure these things out. Hearing is also functional before birth, and it develops rapidly after birth. Hearing is very key to language and social development. So newborns are routinely given hearing tests, and hearing tests should be conducted as soon as possible. The follow-up hearing test should be conducted, and children who are identified as having hearing challenges should be given appropriate treatment. Sight is the least developed at birth. There's nothing to see in the womb. Children can be opening and shutting their eyes, but it's all dark anyway. So children at birth have 2400 vision, but by the time they reach about 8 months, they develop correct 20/20 vision. Binocular vision, that means coordinating both the eyes to see something and getting appropriate depth perception, that develops around age 4 or 5 months. In fact, young children birth through about 3 to 4 months can only see in black and white. So buying brightly colored children's toys is kind of for newborns is kind of pointless, and black and white and high contrast toys are actually the most useful for those very early months of life. Again, what is it that develops children's capacities? Is it nature or is it nurture? Again, the answer is both. Children are born with certain biological parameters and capacities, but environment and nurture and early experiences play a tremendous role in shaping children's capacities.